everyone, welcome back to Unfiltered, the podcast where we make international relations make sense. Today, we're going back more than 4 decades to an event that still sends shockwaves through the Middle East and beyond, the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And the timing of this episode seems especially relevant. This week, the world learned of the passing of Marjane Satrapi, the Iranian French author and filmmaker best known for Persepolis, the graphic memoir that introduced millions of readers to life during and after the Iranian Revolution. For many people outside Iran, Persepolis was the first glimpse into how a major political upheaval could shape the everyday lives of ordinary people. Satrapi's work reminded us that behind every revolution are real individuals navigating uncertainty, change, and questions of our identity. Today, we're going to zoom out from these personal experiences and instead examine the revolution itself, how it transformed Iran, reshaped the Middle East, and continues to influence international relations nearly half a century later. This wasn't just a change in the government. It was a political, religious, and social turning point that reshaped Iran and continues to influence regional power structures, religious identity, and global diplomacy to this day. Before we begin, it's worth noting that the Iranian Revolution remains a deeply debated topic. Different groups inside and outside Iran interpret its legacy very differently. Today's episode focuses on understanding its historical and geopolitical impact, rather than taking a position on whether it was ultimately a success or failure. So here's the big question. How does a revolution from 1979 still matter in 2026? Let's unpack it. To understand its impact, we need to start with what Iran looked like before the revolution. In the decades leading up to 1979, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a close ally of the United States and Western Europe, and his vision was for Iran to be modernized. Rapid industrial growth, secular reforms, and a Western style of social policies. On paper, things looked impressive. Infrastructure projects, expanded education, economic growth fueled by oil. But underneath that progress was widespread dissatisfaction. Many Iranians felt the Shah's modernization came at the cost of their cultural and religious identities. His government was also authoritarian. Political oppression was crushed, censorship was widespread, and the secret police were feared. So, while Iran appeared stable from the outside, internally, resentment was building across different groups: religious leaders, students, workers, and intellectuals. When the revolution came, it wasn't a traditional military coup or a single political movement. It was a mass uprising. Millions of people took to the streets. Strikes shut down the oil industry, and the Shah eventually fled the country. And then came Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a religious cleric who had spent years in exile. His return marked a dramatic shift, not just politically but ideologically. Iran transformed from a monarchy into an Islamic Republic, where religious authority became central to governance. This was unprecedented in the modern Middle East. And the revolution didn't just replace one leader, it replaced an entire system, creating a model of governance that differed significantly from the secular political structure that dominated much of the international system at the time. One of the revolution's most lasting impacts is the political model it introduced. Iran framed itself as a state guided by Islamic principles, resistance to foreign influence, and independence from global superpowers. The message resonated far beyond Iran's borders. Across the Middle East, the revolution inspired Islamic political movements, new debates about governance and religion, and concern among regional governments worried about similar uprisings. For neighboring monarchies and secular regimes, Iran became both a symbol and a warning. Another major consequence of this revolution was how it reshaped sectarian dynamics in the region. Iran is predominantly Shia Muslim, and after 1979, it became the first modern state to openly led by Shia clerical authority. This elevated Shia political identity on a global scale. While sectarian differences existed long before 1979, the revolution intensified them politically. Regional rivalries, particularly between Iran and several Sunni majority states, including Saudi Arabia, increasingly took on a religious dimension alongside existing geopolitical competition. Over time, these tensions influenced conflicts in places like Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria. The revolution didn't just create sectarian divisions, but it undeniably reshaped how they play out geopolitically. It's impossible to talk about the revolution's legacy without addressing Iran's relationship with Western powers, especially the United States. The overthrow of a Western-backed monarch fundamentally changed trust on both sides. Events like the US Embassy hostage crisis in 1979 hardened attitudes and set the tone for decades of tension. Since then, relations have been marked by sanctions, diplomatic standoffs, nuclear negotiations, and periodic attempts at dialogue. Even today, many of the disagreements between Iran and Western governments trace their roots directly back to the revolution and its aftermath. Inside Iran, the revolution reshaped everyday life in lasting ways. The new government introduced laws based on Islamic principles, influencing dress codes, education, media, and gender roles. Supporters viewed many of these changes as preserving religious values and national identities, while critics argued that they imposed new social restrictions. At the same time, Iranian society has never been more static. Over the decades, Iran has developed a young, educated, and highly connected population. Many Iranians today were born long after 1979, and yet they still live with its consequences every day. This creates an ongoing tension between revolutionary ideals and evolving social expectations, one that continues to shape Iran's domestic debates. So, why does the revolution from 1979 still matter right now? First, it matters because Iran is still operating within the political framework created by that revolution. The institutions, leadership structure, and ideology established more than 4 decades ago continues to guide Iran's foreign and domestic policies. When Iran makes decisions about diplomacy, regional alliances, or resistance to outside pressure, these choices are rooted in revolutionary ideas about sovereignty, independence, and opposition to foreign interference. Second, the revolution continues to shape regional power dynamics. Iran's influence in places like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon didn't just emerge in a vacuum. It's tied to a long-term strategy that developed after 1979. Understanding this history helps explain why Iran sees itself not just as a nation-state, but as a key regional actor with the responsibility to project influence beyond its borders. Third, the revolution matters because it changed how religion and politics interact in the Middle East. The idea that a modern state could be governed explicitly through religious authority challenged assumptions about secularism, governance, and legitimacy. Even today, debates across the region about identity, leadership, and law are influenced by the precedent set in Iran in 1979. It also matters on a global level. Many of the most persistent issues in international relations, including sanctions, nuclear negotiations, energy security, and diplomatic tensions, are linked directly to this post-revolutionary relationship between Iran and the international community. When policymakers talk about de-escalation or engagement, they're often grappling with unresolved legacies of that original rupture. Finally, the revolution matters because it's still being contested. Inside Iran, there's an ongoing conversation between generations about what the revolution means today. For some, it represents independence and resistance, while for others, it raises questions about reforms, rights, and representation. That internal dialogue makes Iran a dynamic society, not a frozen revolutionary state, and keeps the legacy of the revolution of 1979 very much alive. This revolution reminds us of something crucial. History never expires. The decisions made decades ago continue to influence how countries interact, how societies define themselves, and how power is negotiated on a global stage. Whether you see the revolution as a moment of resistance, disruption, or transformation, one thing is clear: its impact is still unfolding. That's it for today's episode of Unfiltered. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss out on the next deep dive into international relations. Thank you.